Well, good morning to each of you, and welcome back to our Sunday school class, and welcome to all those who are listening to us online. We are here looking at Daniel chapter 11, looking to try to close out the book of Daniel and this Sunday school class. For Daniel chapter 11, we're taking this in several segments as a reminder. Remember, 2 weeks ago, we actually introduced Daniel 11 with Daniel 10. Daniel chapter 10 is really the introduction. Now we're in the middle of the vision report that the spiritual being, who is the prefiguring of Jesus, the spiritual being who is Jesus before his incarnation, that spiritual being is giving this detailed vision report to Daniel. And so right now what we do, we're finding ourselves in Daniel chapter 11, verse 14. We will recap again on this first part from last week, although we mentioned it. We'll recap that again and move on just as far as we can. After we get through Daniel 11, we'll then talk about some practical applications or things that we can pull out. But the first thing we need to do is understand what is going on in the chapter. So hopefully last week was helpful for you. It is also online if you want to review that. Hopefully this week is also as helpful for you. If at this time you could pause the video, have one person read Daniel chapter 11, verses 14 through 19. Daniel 11, 14 through 19. Then we'll pick up with verse 14. Thank you so much. All right, so thank you so very much for reading. I definitely appreciate it. Here we go. We're starting. It says, "In those times many shall rise against the king of the south." If you recall, we're using John Goldingay's Word Biblical Commentary to really kind of undergird and help us walk through what's going on. And I've taken detailed notes, or at least detailed summaries within my Bible so that I can understand what's going on as well. On this verse, Daniel chapter 11, verse 14, John Goldingay is helping us out. Remember back in verse 13, Antiochus III raised a large army in alliance with Philip V of Macedon to invade the Ptolemy kingdom, i.e. to invade Egypt, right? I mean, that's what's going on. Let's check in with our maps and make sure that we have our memories here. Here are the Seleucids, the empire. That is what is also going to be led by either a Seleucus king or a Antiochus king, right? The king of that empire is always going to be either Seleucus or Antiochus. Remember, the Ptolemy king, Ptolemaic line is really rooted in Egypt, right? So when you hear Ptolemy, yeah, but sometimes they control Palestine and bits of Asia Minor, or even under one of them, they controlled most of Persia or parts of Persia. But for the most part, thinking Ptolemies, you're thinking king of the south, you're thinking Egypt, okay? Antiochus, you're thinking that Seleucid kingdom, you're thinking Asia Minor, Syria, Persia, Macedon, or Thrace, you're thinking of Greece. Both of those different empires, those are two different empires in Greece. So Macedon is part of that Greek empire, and that's what we're thinking about here in this time. So when we get to verse 14, then we see, "In those times many shall rise against the king of the south." At that time, what happens is that the Egyptians are ruled by Ptolemy the Fifth. Ptolemy the Fifth, right? But Ptolemy the Fifth is an infant. So there's a regent, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce it, Agathocles. And this regent, Agathocles, was very oppressive upon the people in the kingdom. This caused an insurrection and Agathocles' assassination. Okay, so that's what this is talking about right here. "In those times many shall rise against the king of the south." It's actually many of his own people rise up against him in the king of the south. But it's really, it's not necessarily against Ptolemy the Fifth. He's an infant. It's against the regent king of the time. And you might as well go ahead and call that regent king. Okay? It just means the ruler, the highest ruler of that kingdom. But then take a look, because in the middle of the verse you have this "and" statement. "And the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail." What is this talking about, right? What is verse 14 talking about here? First, take a look here at this "your," right? The "your own people," the spiritual being is talking to Daniel. So if the spiritual being is talking to Daniel, "your own people" puts us back in Judea, okay? Puts us back in Palestine, specifically at Jerusalem, right? This is where events are now taking place in verse 14. So we've cut out from these large-scale events of the king of the north, the Seleucid Empire, and the king of the south, the Ptolemy Empire, and the wars that they rage and working through their lines. And very suddenly here, you have us going back to the promised land, back to the Jews, back to Judea, back to Daniel's own people, and we're hearing something about them really for the first time in Daniel 11. Everything else in Daniel 11 has been about other nations and other rulers and other kings. This is really the first instance where we're hearing again about the Jews, about the people of Daniel. And so we have this instruction here then: "And the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision." Several questions. What is going on? What's happening? Why is this happening? Let's take a look at what John Goldingay has for us. He says this: "In the Jewish community at this time," right, meaning at the time Antiochus III is allying with Philip V of Macedon, and Ptolemy V is an infant king, and Agathocles is oppressing the people and getting assassinated. At that time, during that time, within the Jewish community, there is strife. Here's what it has. First, the strife is mainly going to involve the high priest. The high priest held the supreme authority in both political and religious affairs at this time. So this is fascinating. Remember that the Davidic line is basically going underground at this time. So when the exiles return under Cyrus, they are ruled by a Davidic governor, Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is the last Davidic governor or king of that line, right? Then it goes down to, I believe it's Zerubbabel, either his daughter or his sister, and who that person married, then becomes governor of Judea. And then it goes off from there, and there is no more Davidic line ruling in Judea. At this time in history, we're thinking, this is about 200 BC, right? At this time, the high priest has the supreme power in Judea over both religious and political affairs, okay? At least in Jerusalem, if not all of Judea. That means the high priest is under either the king of the south, which is Ptolemy, or the king of the north, which is either Antiochus or Seleucid, depending on who's reigning. And they're kind of like a governor in this way. In the community. And so the high priest has the authority. Onias II is currently high priest at that time and shares power with Tobias, who is his brother-in-law. Okay, so Onias II is actually the high priest, but for political reasons, probably political reasons, he shares power with Tobias, who is his brother-in-law. The Oniads are anti-Egyptian. The Tobiads are pro-Egyptian. In verse 14, the most likely the violent who fall are probably the Tobiads, the people of Tobias, right? People of that political party. And so they rise up in order to fulfill the vision. What vision? Maybe the vision in Daniel, right? Maybe one of the visions in Jeremiah. We're maybe the vision of Amos 9:11. We're not quite sure what the vision is that they're looking to fulfill, but probably something having to do with an independent Israel, an independent Judea, or maybe even a temple of some sort. However, they fail. Now, the reason why we say then that these violent are the people of Tobias, the Tobiads, the reason why we say that is because Onanias' line continues on as high priest. Usually, if a rebellion was put down, and if it was the official authority figure who was in rebellion, usually they'd be removed. Usually, not all the time, but usually they would be removed. And so here we have Onanias is going to continue on. I believe Onanias the third is going to come to power at some point in this time, but I can't quite remember. We'll have to see as we go through the passage. But Onanias remains in power. However, the insurrection in Judea doesn't last. It gets put down. All right. So let's take a look then at verse 15. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south shall not stand, or even best his troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. What's this talking about? Well, here's basically just a very general summary of verse 15. In 199 BC, Antiochus defeats Scopas at Pananis, which is Caesarea of Philippi, following him into Sidon, which is the Egyptian fortified city, lays siege, and next year they surrender. Right, so Scopas is one of the Egyptian generals. Remember the king Ptolemy V? He's a baby, right? So he's not leading anyone to war. Let's go check our map and see if we have this here. Right here, you're going to see in Palestine, that is Panias, which Antiochus III first defeats Scopas, who's the Egyptian general. He then follows him. The Egyptian general retreats north to Sidon, probably another fortified city or a stronghold, and it's right there along the coast, maybe where they could get reinforcements or something like that. But he retreats there, and Antiochus laid siege there, and in the following year, Antiochus III lays siege there in Sidon. The next year, Scopas surrenders, and they're then taking over that territory. The forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. Whether that's reference to a siege, or whether that's a reference to, not getting the reinforcements they needed, or not having the king that they need because of the insurrection going on. It's general, so we don't necessarily know, but it came true that they failed. They had to surrender. Okay. Verse 16, but he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. He shall set his face to come with strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. So let's talk about this in verses 16 through 18. We're going to take that as a little lump and go from there. Starting with verses 16 and 17. Here's again the notes from John Goldingay. Antiochus gained control of the Levant, including Judea, capture the areas along the Turkish coast as well. So what's happening in this time is he gains control of basically this region, captures this region up here. He takes over a large section of what was Ptolemaic Empire, right? He gains control of that, Antiochus III. He is then poised to destroy the Ptolemaic Empire, right? Again, remember, Ptolemy V this time is still an infant. Maybe he becomes a kid at this point, but he's still not very strong. He's poised to destroy the entire empire, but he makes peace in 197 BC and betroths his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy V. Okay, so that's what's happened. He gains peace. Now, the question is, like, why would Antiochus III make peace with Ptolemy? Right? Ptolemy V is still an infant at this time, still a child. Why would he make peace? There is a looming threat on the horizon, which is Rome. Okay? Rome is the looming threat, and we're actually going to see Rome come into play later on in Daniel 11. But right here at this time, Rome is becoming the looming threat on the horizon. And what Antiochus III doesn't want to do is jump the gun and set Rome off on himself. Okay, so he doesn't want to do that, and so he makes peace with Ptolemy V. Instead, he hopes his daughter Cleopatra is going to basically destroy Ptolemy V and destroy the empire from the inside. Okay, and here we have that actually. So he stands in the glorious land with destruction in his hand, i.e., Antiochus III is poised to destroy the Egyptian empire. Okay? He shall set his face to come with strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. I.e., he made peace with Ptolemy V. He made peace with Egypt. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not be or stand to be his vantage. This right here is Antiochus III pledging and giving his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy V. Here's the thing. It doesn't work out to his advantage. What happens is his daughter Cleopatra actually becomes loyal and obedient to her husband. Actually, basically falls in love with her husband, Ptolemy V. She becomes obedient to him. She instead encourages him to ally with Rome, which is exactly what Antiochus III was afraid of happening. Right? Antiochus III didn't invade Egypt because he was afraid of setting Rome off, and now he's wanting Cleopatra to destroy the kingdom from the inside. Instead, she strengthens her husband, has him ally with Rome, which is exactly what Antiochus III feared in the first place. Right? So that's how some things come to be. So it shall not stand, i.e., his plan shouldn't stand that his daughter would destroy the kingdom of Ptolemy, nor is it even to his advantage. He doesn't get anything out of it. Why? Because she pushes Ptolemy V to ally with Rome. Verse 18. Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. What happens? Verse 18. Antiochus resumes his attack on Egyptian-held portions of Turkey, invades Macedon and Thrace, yet the Romans defeat him at Thermopylae in 191 BC, then decisively at Magnesia, which is near Smyrna, 1 year later. Okay? So what happens? After the plot fails in Egypt, he goes back and starts destroying things up here. Okay, starts destroying things up here. Let's pull out our other map. He actually continues up. He invades Macedon and Thrace, which is up here. The Romans come and defeat him at Thermopylae. Okay, they come and defeat him up at Thermopylae. Then 1 year later, they defeat him again at Magnesia here in Turkey. Right, so this is closer to his home empire. Over here, Antiochus III was on foreign ground. He was trying to conquer this place. Then he comes back over here. Magnesia was most likely under his control for some time, and he loses again. Right, he loses kind of in a home area in this Asia Minor portion. Okay, so at this time, so that's explaining here in verse 18 and 19. Okay, afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands, capture many of them, but commander puts an end to his insolence. That's Rome. Verse 19, then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Okay, so what's going on here? First, after the battle at Magnesia, where Antiochus III loses, Antiochus becomes a vassal of Rome, meaning becomes basically a part of the Roman Empire, owing tribute to Rome. Antiochus IV is taken by Rome as a hostage. So Antiochus IV, which is Antiochus III's son, taken to Rome as hostage. Antiochus III is assassinated at Elnis in 187 BC while attempting to pillage the treasury of Bel to pay tribute to Rome. Elnis in 187, he's attempting to pay pillage the treasury of Bel, which is actually one of his own gods, to pay for the tribute to Rome. So what happens is Rome conquers him, levies this huge tribute payment or tax upon him. He doesn't have the money for it, so he starts pillaging everything that he can in order to pay the tribute. Okay? So that's verses 14 through 19, and you can see actually this is really specific, and there are direct fulfillments within history with these things happening. I mean, it's pretty on course here for just this is exactly what happens. Sometimes it's a little general, but it's very, very much on course, and you can see it happening in history. And I'm saying it's a little general because I want to come back to something else later on when we get off history course for temporarily, and we then start back at the beginning, so to speak. So I want to say, yeah, this is fulfillment, but there might be another fulfillment later on in history that is yet to come. So at this time, then, let's go ahead and pause. Have one person read for us Daniel chapter 11, verses 20 through 28, please. 20 through 28, please. All right, thank you so very much for reading. We appreciate that. Let's then start in verse 20 and move on. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. What kingdom? We're still talking about the northern kingdom, the northern kingdom, which is going to be the Seleucid Empire. Okay? What's happening? Number one, you have the successor of Antiochus III, which is Antiochus III's son, Seleucus IV. Seleucus IV then has to pay the tribute to Rome that was levied upon his father, right, by Rome. Rome doesn't care who's in power since they're a vassal. All they care about is getting their money, right? And if they don't get their money, then bad things are going to happen. So now Seleucus IV is responsible for that tribute. He sends his finance minister, Heliodorus, who attempts to pillage the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, he attempts to pillage the temple in Jerusalem. Seleucus is then assassinated in 175 BC, and Heliodorus is thwarted from pillaging the temple. And so what do we see? So that the Seleucus IV is the one who is arising in his place. Heliodorus is the exactor of the tribute. Yeah. Heliodorus is the exactor of the tribute. Within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. Why? Because he's assassinated. Okay, so let's then pause, because verse 21 is going to be moving us on in the succession. Let's pause here, because this is actually a pretty interesting story of the exactor, Heliodorus, being kept out of the temple, and it's recorded in the book of Maccabees. Now, here's the thing. Maccabees is in a section of books within the biblical time period that's called the Deuterocanon. Actually, if you were using the Catholic canon, you would have the Book of Maccabees in there, I believe, as part of the Deuterocanon or the secondary canon. These texts are not scripture. They don't have the authority of scripture. They don't have the power of scripture, but they operate much like history books or much like commentaries. They give us insights into the period, insights into the time, insights into the way people are thinking at that time period. Okay, and so when we're going into these books, no, they're not authoritative, but they can be useful. And here we find ourselves moving into the book of, let me catch it, Second Maccabees. And so let me pull that up for us here. So I don't have a copy of the Deuterocanon in the English Standard Version, the ESV, online. I do have a copy in print, but that's irrelevant for our purposes. Here, the quick and easy solution is I have a New Revised Standard Version translation of Second Maccabees available online, and so that's what we'll be using. You'll notice here at the top it says arrival of Heliodorus in Jerusalem. Right? Who is that? Well, that's the finance minister talked about in Daniel chapter 11, verse 20. Okay, take a look at this story here. While the holy city was inhabited in unbroken peace and the laws were strictly observed because of the piety of the high priest Onanias and his hatred of wickedness, it came about that kings themselves honored the place and glorified the temple with the finest presents, even to the extent that King Seleucus of Asia defrayed from his own revenues all the expenses connected with the service of the sacrifices. Okay, let's take a look at this here. And we're going to go down. Oh, well, no. Let me keep reading chapter 3 for us. But a man named Simon of the tribe of Benjamin, who had been made captain of the temple, had a disagreement with the high priest about the administration of the city market. Since he could not prevail over Onanias, he went to Apollonius of Tarsus, who at that time was governor of Coasyria and Phoenicia, and reported to him that the treasury in Jerusalem was full of untold sums of money, so that the amount of the funds could not be reckoned, and that they did not belong to the account of the sacrifices, but that it was possible for them to fall under the control of the king. When Apollonius met the king, he told him of the money about which he had been informed. The king chose Heliodorus, who was in charge of his affairs, and sent him with commands to effect the removal of the reported wealth. Heliodorus at once set out on his journey, ostensibly to make a tour of inspection of the cities of Coasyria and Phoenicia, but in fact to carry out the king's purpose, i.e. of getting money. When he arrived at Jerusalem and had been kindly welcomed by the high priest of the city, he told about the disclosure that had been made and stated why he had come, and he inquired whether this really was the situation. The high priest explained that there were some deposits belonging to widows and orphans, and also some money of Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man of very prominent position, that had totaled in all 400 talents of silver and 200 talents of gold. To such an extent the impious Simon had misrepresented the facts, and he said that it was utterly impossible that wrong should be done to those people who had trusted in the holiness of the place and in the sanctity and inviolability of the temple that is honored throughout the world. So what was happening? Well, the temple was acting kind of like a bank, right? Remember, ancient times weren't really banks around. Okay, so the temple was kind of acting like a bank, holding on to some funds for one very rich individual and many orphans and widows. Okay, and those were the funds that weren't related to the sacrifices in the temple. Heliodorus, the finance minister, has come and wants that money and asks for an accounting of it. Take a look at the rest of the story. But Heliodorus, because of the orders he had from the king, said that this money must in any case be confiscated for the king's treasury. So he set a day and went in to direct the inspection of these funds. There was no little distress throughout the whole city. The priests prostrated themselves before the altar in their priestly vestments and called toward heaven upon him who had given the law about deposits, that he should keep them safe for those who had deposited them. To see the appearance of the high priest was to be wounded at heart, for his face and the change in his color disclosed the anguish of his soul. For terror and bodily trembling had come over the man, which plainly showed to those who looked at him the pain lodged in his heart. People also hurried out of their houses in crowds to make a general supplication because the holy place was about to be brought into dishonor. Women, girded with sackcloth under their breasts, thronged the streets. Some of the young women who were kept indoors ran together to the gates, some to the walls, while others peered out of the windows. Holding up their hands to heaven, they all made supplication. There was something pitiable in the prostration of the whole populace and the anxiety of the high priest in his great anguish. What happened? The whole city is in an uproar that this Gentile is going to enter the temple and take these funds that were deposited in good faith to the temple to hold on to. While they were calling upon the Almighty Lord that he would keep what he had been entrusted safe and secure for those who had entrusted it, Heliodorus went on with what had been decided. But when he arrived at the treasury with his bodyguard, then and there the sovereign of spirits and of all authority caused so great a manifestation that all who had been so bold as to accompany him were astounded by the power of God, became faint with terror. For there appeared to them a magnificently caparisoned horse, with a rider of frightening mien. It rushed furiously at Heliodorus and struck at him with its front hoofs. Its rider was seen to have armor and weapons of gold. 2 young men also appeared to him, remarkably strong, gloriously beautiful, and splendidly dressed, who stood on either side of him and flogged him continuously, inflicting many blows on him. When he suddenly fell to the ground and deep darkness came over him, his men took him up, put him on a stretcher, and carried him away. This man who had just entered the aforesaid treasury with a great retinue, and all his bodyguard, but was now unable to help himself. They recognized clearly the sovereign power of God. Now it's going to go on that the high priest then actually prays for Heliodorus, and Heliodorus recovers, knowing then and there to fear the Lord God. There's no reason to doubt the historicity of the account, even though it's not scripture, but that's some of the really interesting background here buried in verse 20. Notice it's not expounded upon, right? It's not brought out in this particular vision, right? The spiritual being who's revealing this to Daniel has very focused and specific intentions on revealing what he's revealing to Daniel. Now later history then expands on these things, and we can read about what happened to this exactor of tribute, and what also then happens to this king who's Seleucus V. Okay? And so that's just some interesting backstory there that you would find in 2 Maccabees chapter 3. All right, and let's go on to verse 21. In his place shall arise a contemptible person, to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Right? Or you might even say by deception. Let's go back to John Goldingay here. This is the introduction of Antiochus IV. Now, if you remember from past lessons in Daniel, Antiochus IV is the type of the Antichrist, right? He's the little horn in Daniel 7 on the fourth beast. Antiochus IV is spoken about often in Daniel. In Daniel's visions here. And so Antiochus IV is now coming to power. He is the type of the Antichrist to come. And the rest of this vision, all the way down to verse 39, is really going to be, at least till 35, if not all the way down through 39, is going to be dealing with Antiochus IV. So let's see. Antiochus IV, remember, Antiochus IV was given to Rome as a hostage and is now coming back from Rome to the Seleucid Empire. Seleucus IV, remember he's the king, he's assassinated in 175 BC. And there are some who might think that Antiochus IV is actually involved in that plot so that he can regain power. But we don't know for sure. Antiochus IV comes to power then. He comes to power by slipping in and basically saying that he's going to become the guardian and or regent over Seleucus IV's son. Right? And we'll just, I don't know his name. It's just Seleucus IV's son. So remember, Seleucus IV was assassinated. Antiochus IV comes in then, and over Seleucus IV's son, who should rule, Antiochus IV goes, oh, well, I'll be the guardian regent in charge, being his uncle. Right? So there's family dynamics going on here, and Antiochus IV really is uncle, but it's not the person to whom royal majesty has been given. Royal majesty was given to Seleucus IV's son, and instead Antiochus IV is going to come in, and he comes in without warning. Remember, he returns suddenly from being a hostage from Rome, obtains the kingdom by saying, hey, I'm going to be the regent and all this sort of stuff. And he gains support by doing this, right? So he kind of flatters some other governors and some other regional kings or whatever the case might be, basically takes the kingdom. Okay, so then what we see here is then armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. Now, what's happening here? We have to come back to our pronouns, and I know the pronouns probably the one things we want to pay attention to the least, but they're the most important thing in this particular vision, is so that we remain on target. Before him, who's the him? The him is referring to this person who is the contemptible person arising in place and obtaining the kingdom by flatteries. That's the him that then follows in verse 22. So armies then that are utterly swept away before him, meaning armies are swept away before Antiochus IV. Meaning this, Antiochus IV's armies defeat these other armies in battle. It's not literally that Antiochus IV takes on armies by himself, right? We might make that mistake. That would be an incorrect presumption. It means that his armies defeat other armies and they're broken. Even the Prince of the Covenant. What this means is that the Prince of the Covenant is swept away before him. That is not talking about any sort of spiritual being here. That's talking about the ruler over the Holy Land. Well, who's the ruler over the Holy Land? The ruler of the Holy Land is the high priest at that time. The high priest at that time. Let's try to finish up verse 22 here. So the overwhelming forces coming against him are probably Egypt, and those forces are broken. The ruler of the covenant then is probably Onanias III, who is the high priest. Onanias III is replaced by Jason from the pro-Syrian Tobiad party. Now, this is a little bit confusing in John Goldingay, because back in verse 14, John Goldingay says that Onanias is anti-Egyptian, and the Tobiads are pro-Egyptian, but now it seems to be reversed. Tobiads are the pro-Syrian or pro-Seleucus, and Onanias was then pro-Egyptian. Those things can happen. People can change sides like that. But what's happening here then is that Onanias III, who is the high priest, is swept away and replaced by a high priest named Jason. These helped, or the Tobiad party and Jason helped Antiochus gain power in Judea. Okay, now let's take a look here in verse 23. From that time an alliance is made with him, and he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. What that means is, And we'll continue on to verse 24 here too. Without warning, he shall come in to do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds for only a time. And he shall stir up his power and heart against the king of the south, the great army. We're going to stop there for verse 25, but let's go ahead and try to explain this part of 24 very quickly in 23. Jason and the Tobiad party, Jason now is the new high priest, and the Tobiad party ally with Antiochus IV and look to bring Hellenism into Judea. So this then comes into, without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province and do what neither his fathers have done, and done all these things with goods. Part of what that's indicating is that Antiochus IV comes in, delivers all this stuff, and Jason and the high priest and the Tobiad party then look to bring Greek culture into the cities. They look to build gymnasiums, the educational and the workout centers, so to speak, of Greek culture, and they look to put in the Greek baths and all of the different sorts of Greek cultural things, which is considered an attack against Judaism, an attack against God, and even in many ways an idolatry against God. And under Jason, a whole lot of the zealousness for the law becomes much laxer, and that part of that's because of the influence of the Greek culture being brought in. So this is what acting deceitfully, becoming strong with the small people, entering in and doing what his fathers and fathers' fathers had not done, and devising plans against strongholds, right? That's not necessarily military plans, but those are cultural plans, at least if it's referencing to Judea. All right, thank you so much. We'll then look to pick up here next time at verse 25. So that's where we'll pick up next time. I hope this is helpful and interesting. At some point, I'll look to be able to get a timeline out for you on a piece of paper with all this information on it. It is very detailed, it's very complex, and it's very historical, which is wonderful. I mean, it's great that this vision of Daniel's came true. But we just have to take our time and go through it bit by bit. All right, I hope to see you all upstairs. Thank you so very much, and God bless you all. Bye-bye.